Christmas evening, 2007, a house in Bel Air. The Hilton family was gathered around a tree. 3 generations of them, the surname recognizable to anyone who had ever booked a hotel. The patriarch was 80 years old. His name was Barron. He had decided to tell them what was going to happen to the money. His personal fortune at that moment was estimated at $2.3 billion. 97% of it was going to charity. The remaining 3% would be split among 24 family members. The family was not going broke. 24 people sharing 3% of $2.3 billion is still serious money. What they were losing was the rest of it. An inheritance most of them had grown up assuming, without anyone ever quite saying it out loud, would eventually belong to them. One granddaughter, by most accounts, was getting nothing at all. The granddaughter was Paris Hilton, and the date Barron chose for the announcement was not a coincidence. December 25th was his own father's birthday. The father had built the Hilton hotel chain starting in 1919. The father had also, when he died in 1979, given away 97% of his fortune to the same foundation. Exact same percentage, same charity. The son was repeating the father. Same date as his father's birthday, same destination, different children sitting in the room. That detail is what stays with me, because almost no Hilton documentary tells the story straight. The fall of the Hilton family is not a fall in the ordinary sense. Nobody embezzled the company. Nobody gambled it away. The hotels are still standing. The brand is everywhere. What is gone is the family's relationship to the money, and the people who broke that relationship were the patriarchs themselves. That is what we are going to follow over the next 30 minutes or so. 3 generations, 2 disinheritances, and a charitable foundation that today sits on more than $7 billion, while the family it is named after went looking for other ways to make a living. Where this story actually starts is the New Mexico territory in the 1880s, with a Norwegian immigrant and his Catholic wife. Chapter 1. The Empire Built on Guilt. Conrad Nicholson Hilton was born on Christmas Day, 1887. Hold on to that. It will come back. The place was San Antonio, New Mexico, not the Texas one. A frontier village in Socorro County, population a few hundred, sitting on a railroad spur next to a coal town called Carthage that does not really exist anymore. The Hilton building was a combination general store, hotel, and family residence, all wedged into the same structure. Augustus Hilton, the father, was a Norwegian immigrant from a farm in Kløfta, north of Oslo. Mary Genevieve Laufersweiler, the mother, was a German Catholic from Iowa. Those two halves are going to shape Conrad for the next 91 years. The Norwegian father gave him the work ethic. The Catholic mother gave him the conscience. The mother is the part most biographers skim past. Mary Hilton was not casually religious. She was the kind of Catholic who decided every major question her son ever faced. When the family business hit trouble, she did not advise him on finances. She told him to pray. He wrote down her exact words in his autobiography later. Some men jump out windows. Some quit. Some go to church. Pray, Connie. It is the best investment you will ever make. He believed her. That belief is the structural element of this entire story. His path to hotels was not direct. He served in the first state legislature of New Mexico from 1912 to 1916, decided politics was crooked, served in the Army during the First World War, and came home in 1919 with $5,011 in his pocket and a plan to buy a bank in Texas. The plan fell apart. The hotel he ended up buying instead, almost by accident, was the Mobley in Cisco, Texas. 40 rooms, $40,000. The West Texas oil boom was at its peak. Workers were sleeping in shifts because there was nowhere else to put them. Rooms at the Mobley were renting out 3 customers per bed per day. Conrad paid the place off in less than a year. Within 6 years he built the Dallas Hilton, a high-rise that towered over the rest of the city's lodging. By 1930 he had 4 high-rise Texas hotels and was building a 5th. He was 37 years old. Then the Depression hit and almost finished him. By 1931, he was carrying $500,000 in debt he could not service. By 1933, he had lost most of the chain. His creditors retained him as the manager of the combined operation. So for 2 years, the future founder of the Hilton hotel empire ran hotels he no longer owned, including some he had built with his own money. By his own account in his autobiography, he prayed his way through those years. He came out of it with 8 hotels. By the late 1930s, he was buying again. The Sir Francis Drake in San Francisco, the Stevens in Chicago, which at the time was the largest hotel in the world. In 1949, he bought the Waldorf Astoria in New York. Somewhere in the middle of all that climbing, his first marriage came apart. He had married Mary Adelaide Barron in 1925 in Dallas. They had 3 sons, Conrad Jr., nicknamed Nicky, in 1926, William Barron in 1927, Eric Michael in 1933. The marriage held through the oil boom years. It came apart during the Depression. They divorced in 1934. This is where the spine of the story bends. For a Roman Catholic of his particular generation, divorce was not paperwork. It was a violation of a vow made before God. The church did not recognize it. Conrad did not really recognize the church's position either, but he never stopped feeling it. What he did was refuse to remarry sacramentally for the next 42 years. He went through a civil marriage in 1942 to Zaza Gabor. She was Hungarian, recently arrived in the United States as a refugee, and the acting career she would later become famous for had not yet started. The Catholic Church considered their union no marriage at all. On some level, so did Conrad. The Gabor marriage produced a daughter, Francesca, who was going to be a chapter of her own. The marriage itself, Conrad later treated as something that had happened to a man he was no longer. 1944 is the year I want to land on. That year, with his soul still held at arm's length by his church, he created the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. The unusual thing about it is the timing. Most foundations of that scale get set up late in life, as estate planning. Conrad was 57. He had 35 years still to live. He was building the foundation while he was still expanding the hotel chain, while he was still in the prime of his working years. That is not how rich men typically structured these things. The reason it was unusual is the reason it mattered. The foundation was not a tax instrument. It was something separate, growing alongside the hotels, sharing his name. He was building it carefully and slowly, like a man who knew it would eventually carry weight he could not yet describe. He spent the next 35 years figuring out what that weight would be. Whatever the answer turned out to be, his 3 sons and his daughter were going to have to live with it. Chapter 2. 8 Months with Elizabeth Taylor. Nicky Hilton was 23 years old when he married Elizabeth Taylor. He was dead at 42. The years in between are the public record of how badly the Hilton family's first heir came apart. He was the eldest son. He was supposed to inherit the company. He never came close. The official name was Conrad Nicholson Hilton, Jr. The family called him Nicky from the start, because his father was already Conrad. He was born in Dallas in July 1926, the firstborn of the 3 sons Conrad had with Mary Adelaide Barron. By his early 20s, he had moved through what rich young men did in 1940s America. New Mexico Military Institute. Wartime service in the Navy, on the battleship North Carolina. The École Hôtelière de Lausanne, the Swiss hotel school his father sent him to in order to learn the family business. He was suspended after 6 months. In 1949 he was 23, working for his father's hotel corporation in California. He was the kind of young man the gossip columns wrote about routinely. In October of that year, he met Elizabeth Taylor at the Macambo nightclub on the Sunset Strip. She was 17. She had been signed to a film studio contract since she was 9. She had just finished Conspirator. She was about to be cast in Father of the Bride. She was the kind of star MGM still controlled the personal life of. Her mother went where she went. Her studio approved her dates. Every step she took ended up in the trade papers, often before she had taken it. Nicky Hilton was approved. The studio liked him. The papers liked him. The Hilton name carried a kind of weight even MGM understood. And Elizabeth, at 17, was looking for a way out of her mother's house. Marriage was the legitimate exit, and they were engaged within 4 months. The wedding was May 6, 1950. Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, a Catholic parish that had become a standard venue for Hollywood weddings. 3,000 people stood outside. The reception was at the Bel Air Country Club. The bride was 18. The groom was 23. MGM released Father of the Bride, in which Elizabeth played a young woman marrying her first love, within weeks of the real ceremony. The line between her actual life and the studio's script for her had not really existed in years. That summer it disappeared entirely. The honeymoon began on the RMS Queen Mary out of New York and lasted several weeks. The drinking started on the wedding night and never stopped. By the time they reached Europe, the marriage was already in trouble. It would last another 7 months in legal terms. This is the part of the story that took 38 years to enter the public record properly. In her 1988 memoir, Elizabeth Takes Off, Elizabeth Taylor described in her own words what had happened. She wrote it when Nicky had been dead for 19 years and could not respond. He drank from the wedding night onward. He became sullen, angry, abusive, physically and mentally. He gambled in casinos across Europe. He came back to the cabin late and not sober. Some nights he hit her. The Nanette Burstein documentary from 2024, Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes, added detail from previously unreleased recordings Taylor had made in her own voice: a split lip, a kick to the stomach hard enough to cause a miscarriage. Specific incidents she had kept out of the memoir. She was 18 years old. She had no family with her. She did not tell anyone until she got home. She finished the trip. She lived with him in Los Angeles for several more weeks. She announced the separation in December. The marriage had lasted 7.5 months from ceremony to separation. She got the divorce on January 29, 1951, on grounds of mental cruelty. She was still 18. She would turn 19 a month later. She would marry Michael Wilding the following year. She had 6 more husbands ahead of her across her life, including Richard Burton twice. Nicky Hilton was the first. He was the only one she ever described in language that direct. Nicky kept the Hilton job. The drinking did not stop. The drugs got added in. May 1954. He was arrested in Los Angeles for public intoxication after a night at a club. The deputies who found him stumbling drunk reported that he resisted arrest and tried to bribe them. He received 2 years of probation. He was 27. In 1957, he was dating Natalie Wood and Joan Collins at the same time, openly enough that both women later wrote about it. Joan Collins, in a BBC documentary decades later, described an incident in bed in which Nicky pulled out a handgun and shot the ceiling. In November of 1958, he married Patricia McClintock, called Trish. She was an oil heiress from Oklahoma. They had 2 sons together. Conrad Nicholson. Hilton III, born January 1960. Michael Otis Hilton, born June 1961. McClintock filed for divorce in February 1964. The petition cited what it called extreme mental and physical suffering. They reconciled briefly. She filed again in August 1967. The second petition cited repeated acts and threats of violence. By that point, Nicky was addicted to Seconal. It was a barbiturate sedative the doctors of the period prescribed routinely for sleep. He was mixing it with hard liquor on a regular basis. The second divorce was never finalized. They were legally married and physically separated when he died. He died on February 5, 1969, West Los Angeles, in his sleep. Alcohol-related heart attack. He was 42 years old. The detail I find missing from most of the obituaries is this. At the time of his death, Conrad Nicholson Hilton Jr. was president of the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. His father had moved him into that role. The eldest son, the original heir, was the figurehead of the charitable institution that would, 10 years after Nicky's death, inherit almost everything the family had. Nicky never knew that part. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. His father outlived him by 10 years almost exactly. The original line of succession ended in that cemetery. Chapter 3. The Daughter Who Slept in Her Car. Francesca Hilton did stand-up comedy at the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard. The routine, which she performed regularly from around 2008 until shortly before her death, went after her own family, especially her great-nieces, Paris and Nikki. She could make those jokes because she was the only person in the room who actually was a Hilton. She was the only daughter Conrad Hilton ever had. She was the only child Zsa Zsa Gabor ever had. The combined inheritance of two famous American families landed on one person, who was telling jokes about her own family for $50 covers at a West Hollywood comedy club. That was the bottom of her life. The top of her life, I would argue, was the day she was born. Constance Francesca Gabor Hilton was born in New York on March 10, 1947. Her parents had been divorcing for almost a year by the time she arrived. Conrad, by several accounts, had started questioning whether the baby was his. That detail did not become public until after his death. But the questioning was apparently real, and it shaped how he wrote her into his will 32 years later. Zsa Zsa told her own version much later. In her 1991 autobiography, One Lifetime Is Not Enough, she wrote that Francesca's conception had not been consensual. Specifically, she wrote that Conrad had raped her during the marriage. Both of them were dead by the time most people read the claim. There is no way to confirm it now. What can be said is that the marriage produced one child, that the father carried doubts about her paternity, and that those doubts ended up encoded in the legal document that controlled what happened to her after he died. Francesca grew up in a different kind of strange. She lived with Zsa Zsa, mostly. She traveled in the wake of her mother's social calendar. She had no real relationship with her father. The three Hilton sons were the heirs. She was a separate consideration, on the other side of a divorce that had happened before she could remember it. She tried various things as an adult. A small part in a Jack Nicholson film called A Safe Place in 1971. Photography, publicity work, then the stand-up in her 60s. The routine that pulled directly from her family. The income from any of it was never large. In January 1979, her father died. Francesca was left $100,000 in his will. The estate itself was worth approximately $500 million. She contested the will. She lost. The contest forced the question of paternity into open court. The documents Conrad had left behind apparently referenced his doubt. The judge ruled against her. Whatever moral claim she had as the only daughter was overridden by the legal claim her father had structured, which positioned her as a possibly biological footnote to a marriage he had not recognized. She walked away with nothing she could use. She was 32 years old. The version of herself she had been preparing to become, an actual Hilton heiress, ended in that courtroom. She lived another 36 years. A lot of them went to fighting her stepfather. Zsa Zsa, in her 70s, married Frederick Prince von Anhalt, who became her 9th husband. After a car accident in 2002 left Zsa Zsa incapacitated, Francesca and von Anhalt fought in court for over a decade about who controlled her care. The fight cost Francesca what little she had managed to save. By 2014, she was bouncing between weekly rental apartments in West Hollywood and her car. She was pawning her furs to buy meals. She was on Social Security. On January 5, 2015, she had a stroke at home. Her fiancé performed CPR while paramedics worked. She was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai. She was 67. Her mother was 97, in bed with dementia, and was never told her daughter had died. Her stepfather attempted to claim the body. Her half-brother Baron took possession and arranged a funeral at St. Ambrose Catholic Church in West Hollywood. She was buried there. The autobiography she had been working on, called Hotels, Diamonds, and Me, was never finished. She had been on the phone with her publicist about a possible publishing deal in the hours before her stroke. The only daughter of Conrad Hilton died with nothing the will had not already taken from her in 1979. Chapter 4, 35. Wills. By one count, Conrad Hilton wrote his last will and testament 35 times. Over the last 3 decades of his life, every time something changed, he rewrote it. A new acquisition, a son's marriage, a son's death, a grandchild born. The will was a living document. When he died of pneumonia on January 3, 1979, at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, the version on file was the latest of those drafts. He was 91 years old. The personal estate was estimated at approximately $500 million. Almost none of it went to the family. The direct bequests to family members were small. The two surviving sons, Baron and Eric, received bequests in the hundreds of thousands. Francesca received less. Grandchildren and other relatives received smaller amounts still. The bulk of the estate, the 13.5 million shares of Hilton Hotels Corporation stock the empire itself was built on, went to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation. That was approximately 97% of everything he owned. The two living sons received between them less than $1 million from a fortune of $500 million. The foundation he had created in 1944 received the rest. What the will did include was a long preamble in Conrad's own words. It is the kind of document estate lawyers usually keep short. Conrad treated it as a sermon. He wrote that charity was a supreme virtue, the great channel through which the mercy of God reached humanity. He instructed the foundation board to give without geographic, religious, or racial restriction. He singled out the Catholic sisters who had taught him as a boy in New Mexico as the recipients he most wanted the foundation to help. He wrote about sheltering children with the umbrella of charity. He warned the board to be cautious of large institutional charities with high-salaried executives. He also wrote, in the wording that the lawyers would soon argue over, a clause that gave one of his sons an option. The clause was paragraph 8, A of the will. It allowed Baron Hilton, the second son, and the man already running the company day to day, the right to buy the foundation's controlling block of Hilton Hotels stock at a fixed price. The reasoning was protective. Conrad wanted the company to stay in Hilton hands if at all possible. The foundation, a charitable trust, could not actually run a hotel chain. The option was his solution to the tension he had built into his own will. What he had not anticipated, I think, was that once the foundation actually held those shares, the foundation would not want to give them up. Conrad was buried at Calvary Hill Cemetery in Dallas. The will was filed with the probate court within weeks. Within months, the foundation's attorneys were raising questions about paragraph 8, A. Over the next 2 years, Baron Hilton filed 3 formal notices that he intended to exercise the option his father had written for him. The clause Conrad had designed to keep the company in the family was about to become the longest legal fight of his son's life. Chapter 5. Suing the Sisters. Baron Hilton had been on the board of the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation since 1954. In 1983, he sued it. He was, at that point, the chairman and CEO of Hilton Hotels Corporation, and a 29-year veteran of the foundation's board. He was also the plaintiff in a major lawsuit against the foundation he served on. The strange logistics of suing an organization you helped run was the smaller problem. The bigger one was that he was suing it for control of the company his father had founded. The position the foundation took was straightforward. Conrad Hilton had left 97% of his estate to it. The will represented his explicit wishes. Baron's lawsuit was asking the court to override them. The position Baron took was rooted in the same document. Paragraph 8A gave him the right to exercise an option to purchase the foundation's controlling block of Hilton Hotels stock. The clause was Conrad's own provision. Baron was not overriding his father. He was executing what his father had explicitly authorized. Both sides were right. The will did say both things. The lawsuit was about which interpretation prevailed when they conflicted in practice. There was also a tax law in the background. The Tax Reform Act of 1969 had prohibited private foundations from owning more than 20% of a corporation. Conrad's bequest amounted to about 27% of Hilton Hotels. The foundation was already over the legal limit before it took possession. Something had to give. Either the foundation divested or the rule bent, or someone bought the shares. Conrad's solution had been the buyback option. The foundation's preference by the early 1980s was to keep the shares and work around the tax problem in other ways. The two preferences were incompatible. Baron filed in 1983. The case moved through the California probate courts for 5 years. The foundation defended itself by arguing that the buyback clause was not as straightforwardly enforceable as Barron claimed. The Catholic sisters whose work the foundation funded did not appear in court directly, but the optics of a Hilton suing a charity that supported nuns played in the case's public profile. In March of 1988, the California Court of Appeal ruled in Barron's favor. The clause Conrad had created was, as Barron had argued, enforceable. The foundation had to honor it. The actual settlement took another year to negotiate. When it was finalized in 1989, the 13.5 million shares at the heart of the dispute were divided in 3 parts. Barron received 4 million shares directly. The foundation received 3.5 million outright. The remaining 6 million were placed in a special trust, the W. Barron Hilton Charitable Remainder Unit Trust, which would pay income to Barron during his lifetime and then revert to the foundation when he died. There is one financial detail I want to note. On the day Conrad died, the contested shares had been worth approximately $160 million. By the time the ruling came down 9 years later, they were worth roughly $654 million. Barron had been running the company throughout the litigation. The value he was fighting for had been built, in significant part, by his own management of the asset he was trying to take possession of. Barron in his early 60s had what he had sued for, 4 million shares of the company he was already running. He stayed CEO for another 7 years. He continued on the foundation board. He inherited his portion of the empire and kept building. The foundation, on the other side of the table, did not lose either. It held 3.5 million shares outright. It held the contingent interest in 6 million more through the unit trust. When Barron eventually died, those shares would flow back to it. The result was, in a way, exactly what Conrad had wanted. The company stayed in Hilton hands during his son's lifetime, and the foundation received the bulk of the wealth over the long term. The route to that result had just gone through a decade of his son arguing against him. Conrad had given, Barron had fought him on it. The next time the question came up, it would be Barron giving, and no one would fight him. Chapter 6. A Patriarch's Mirror. On Christmas Day, 2007, Barron Hilton told his family he was leaving them 3% of his fortune. The other 97% was going to the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, exactly the percentage his father had left to the same foundation 28 years earlier. The trigger, by most accounts, was Paris. Paris Hilton was Barron's granddaughter through his son, Rick. By 2007, she was the most recognized member of the family, more than the chairman who actually ran the hotel chain. The recognition had not come from anything the family was traditionally known for. It had come from an intimate video that leaked in 2003, a reality television show, a DUI arrest, a probation violation, and a stretch in the Los Angeles County jail system in May and June of 2007, 6 months before Barron's announcement. Family biographer Jerry Oppenheimer, in interviews around the release of his House of Hilton in 2006, characterized Barron as deeply embarrassed by how the youngest generation was treating the family name. The interviews predate the disinheritance by a year. The disinheritance itself came after a summer in which Paris specifically had been photographed leaving jail in handcuffs. The other thing that had happened in 2007, in October, was the sale of Hilton Hotels Corporation to the Blackstone Group for $26 billion. The deal took the company off the New York Stock Exchange after 60 years of public trading. Barron, who held a significant block of stock through his decades with the company, had become extraordinarily liquid almost overnight. His personal fortune, which had been on paper before October, was now actually cash. That cash, in roughly the amount of $2.3 billion, was what he was disposing of on Christmas Day. He had planned the announcement carefully. He obtained an advance ruling from the Internal Revenue Service confirming his preferred tax treatment. He obtained an approval from the California Probate Court. He obtained written waivers from each of his children, in which they confirmed that they would not contest the disposition. He inserted no contest clauses into his will and the supporting trust documents. The structure was designed so that nothing his children or grandchildren could do after his death would unravel it. The man who had spent a decade in court arguing that a will could be challenged on the merits of its specific clauses had now structured a will that could not be challenged at all. He gathered the family for the announcement, his children, his grandchildren, including Paris and her younger sister Nikki, aunts, uncles by marriage. He told them what was going to happen. Then it was Christmas dinner. The announcement reached the press within days. Reuters and Forbes confirmed the basic outlines. The story was covered as a generous philanthropic decision by the hotel heir. What almost none of the coverage noted was the parallel with 1979. Most outlets treated Barron's decision as singular, generous, perhaps tax-efficient. Almost none of them noticed that the 80-year-old chairman was repeating, almost down to the percentage point, what his father had done at age 91. I find that omission strange. The man who had sued his father over the same decision was now making the decision himself. The foundation would not need to fight for the money this time. Barron had handed it over. Chapter 7. What Hilton Means Now. Barron Hilton died on September 19, 2019, at his home in Los Angeles. He was 91 years old. Same age his father had been at death. 40 years and 8 months apart. What remained of the W. Barron Hilton Charitable Remainder Unit Trust reverted to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation that month, as he had structured. The remainder of his estate followed. The pledge he had announced on Christmas Day 2007 had been waiting 12 years for this moment. The foundation today holds approximately $7.4 billion in assets. Across its history, it has distributed roughly $3.6 billion in grants. Its giving flows to the program areas Conrad named: Catholic sister congregations like the ones that taught him as a boy, children at risk, young people transitioning out of foster care, water and sanitation projects abroad. The Conrad N. Hilton Humanitarian Prize, given out each year to a humanitarian organization, is worth $2.5 million. It is the largest annual humanitarian prize in the world. Conrad would have recognized most of it. Some he would not have. The foundation has grown into the kind of large professional institution with well-compensated executives that his will specifically cautioned the board against. The board responded to that cautionary line, as far as anyone can tell, by reading it and proceeding anyway. The foundation became what foundations of that age and scale tend to become. What Conrad would have been more surprised by is what happened to the family name without him. Paris Hilton, the granddaughter blamed for triggering the second disinheritance, did not become poor. She had been working since her early 20s. She had a perfumery line that, by various estimates, generated north of $2.6 billion in sales over the years following the announcement. She had partnerships with hotel groups in Las Vegas and the Philippines. She had a DJ career. She had a reality television franchise. She had product licensing across cosmetics, accessories, and home goods. By the 2020s, her various business interests were collectively reported to be worth approximately $300 million. That is not a Conrad Hilton fortune. It is also, I would point out, not nothing. It is enough money for her share of Barron's actual estate, the small portion she did receive from the disinheritance, to be almost a rounding error in her own portfolio. Paris has since become, against most predictions, the most enduringly recognized member of the Hilton family. The hotels are still standing. The foundation is still funded. And the Hilton most people picture when they hear the name is the one who was supposed to be the disinheritance story. The family that did not inherit the money is still here. Some of them are running things, some are not. One of them is more famous than her grandfather was, on the strength of a name he tried to keep her out of. That is the state of the Hilton family in the third decade of the 21st century. 2 patriarchs, 2 disinheritances, 1 charitable foundation worth more than the founder ever dreamed, and a granddaughter who built her own. There is a mirror at the center of this story that I find difficult to look away from. Conrad Hilton made a single idiosyncratic decision at the end of his life. He left 97% of his fortune to a charitable foundation he had built, in part to atone for a divorce he could not reconcile with his Catholic faith. 28 years later, His son, who had spent a decade in court fighting that decision, made the same decision. Same percentage, same foundation. Whatever Barron had been arguing against in 1983 was not, in the end, what his father had decided. Once he received the option his father had written for him, the question of what to do with the money looked the same to him as it had looked to his father. I do not know whether this is comforting or unsettling. The patriarch's instinct to give the family fortune away rather than hand it down is a deep one in American business culture. Conrad and Barron sit firmly in that tradition. They were not unusual in their choices, only in how closely they repeated each other. What was unusual was the family. 2 consecutive disinheritances, and the Hilton dynasty still produced a granddaughter who built her own $300 million empire and became the most famous member of the bloodline by a wide margin. Paris was supposed to be the dropout. She became the proof that the name still meant something, regardless of what the foundation owned. The fortune ended up where Conrad wanted it. The family ended up somewhere different than he could have imagined. Whether you call that a fall or a survival depends on what you measure.